want it. So, okay, I start with this because when we finished Hebrews last time, you remember the writer of Hebrews, the author, he was saying, I'm not sure if you're ready for real solid food. Solid food. So the question as we left last week, he answered for us, are you ready for solid food, or you have to go back to the milk? Is it milk or it's solid food? Is it meat or milk? Meat or milk? And he said, okay, you're ready for the meat. So today is meat. So I need to warn you a little bit. This is going to be a large meal today, and you can't just swallow it like a glass of milk. You got to have to chew on it for a while. So we're going to do some chewing today, but I got to warn you, we're into meat today. We're into a section of Hebrews that I bet you, only 1 out of 1,000 churches ever touches. But it's just remarkable in so many ways. So this is meat. You ready for this? Are you up for it? Just keep thinking of that steak on the grill, and you can't eat it real fast. You got to chew on it. We're going to chew. So what exactly is the meat that he's been putting off? He's been teasing us about this for a couple of weeks, saying, we're going to talk about this. No, let's do something else for a while. Okay, we're coming back to this. Well, no, I don't think so. Well, let's do it now. No, I don't know if you're ready. Okay, you're ready. So after all that delay, here we go. The meat issue today is about Melchizedek. But first, we got to talk about the Messiah, okay? Let's set some background. And we've talked about this before. Expectations of the Jews about the Messiah was, I put a picture of a knight kind of. It was very militaristic because the Messiah is someone who's going to bring justice for Israel. Justice. All the bad guys that do bad stuff, someday they'd wag their finger. The Messiah is going to come. He's going to make everything right. Now, that's not a false claim. Here's just a couple supporting proofs to show you what they're talking about. You go to Psalm 2, one of the largest, maybe the largest messianic psalm, talking about the coming Messiah. Psalm 2:2, the kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. Against his anointed. And that word for Messiah is that word anointed. So when you look in the Old Testament, if you're going to do a survey and look for the word Messiah, you'll only find it a tiny bit, but what you will find is anointed. That's what it means. It means someone who God has put the oil on their head, put his hand on and said, you're the person of purpose. This is the plan. You're in the middle of my plan. You're the guy I've appointed. Now, the word anointed also is used in many contexts when God talks about someone who is his. So like he'll talk about the nation of Israel as the anointed ones. God has his hand on them. But we're talking about a specific person here who, according to Psalm 2, the entire earth and all its kings and all its militaries are going to conspire together to figure out how to oppose God and how to oppose God's Messiah. Whew. Well, if you read Psalm 2, the Messiah wins. Here's another one from Psalm 132. Not quite as common, but 132:18. His enemies I will clothe with shame, but on him his crown will shine. Ooh, so it sounds very militaristic, very powerful, and it is. It's meant to be. And so for Israel, which was so oppressed by the nations in their times, they would always say to God, God, you need to bring your Messiah today because things are going bad. So the Messiah was the hope of justice. But there was more to that than just a militaristic, powerful justice bringer. There was something about kingship as well. And if you go to the end of Genesis, okay, at the end of Genesis, you have Jacob, renamed Israel, but Jacob is dying at the end of Genesis, and he's blessing his sons, who are the 12 sons that make the 12 tribes of Israel. And as he blesses them in birth order, he sort of is prophesying about their future, what their future is going to be like. So starting at Reuben, his prophecy about Reuben's pretty dire. And it's because Reuben has done some very dire things in his life. And he's the firstborn. Reuben, Simeon and Levi, 2 and 3, both dire predictions. And then he finally gets to number 4, which is Judah. And something changes about Judah. And this is what he says about Judah's future. He says, Judah is a lion's cub. Who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah. That's the power thing, right? The king's hold. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Wow. So when a Jew would read this, they'd say, if I was going to make a wild guess about which tribe the Messiah is coming from, I'd say Judah. Sounds like Judah. It's definitely not Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, which came before. It's Judah. And there's another interesting place right here. When David is dying now, it's many centuries later, David's dying. And in 2 Samuel 7, this is what goes on. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, this is God speaking, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom, and he shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Now, he's talking immediately about Solomon, right? But there's many times double meanings in all this stuff. And what he's saying is that out of the line of David and Solomon, someone is going to be a king forever. Well, now that sounds like the Messiah. Yes, that sounds like the Messiah. Is it the right tribe? Yes, it is the right tribe. Okay, so that's the Messiah. So this is what they think about when they think the Messiah. Someone who brings justice, protection from enemies, rights all the wrongs. No one can stop him. The kings of the earth conspire against him, but even still, he's going to prevail. Ooh, Messiah. You didn't get excited. Well, so we can probably presume that the Messiah is going to come out of Judah. And we know more specifically born in Bethlehem. So, we know this. And this is the Jewish expectation. It's very clear in the Old Testament that that's going to be the case. This powerful one will come. But there's another side to the Messiah that's often overlooked. And it comes about in terms of this high priest idea. And I'm going to go back to 1 Samuel 2. Oh, if you haven't read the beginning of 1 Samuel 1, Eli, 1 Samuel 2, Hannah. If you haven't read Hannah's prayer and her song, that's in 2, right? Yeah, okay. I was starting to lose my mind. Yeah, 1 Samuel 2. Hannah, the mother of Samuel. And Eli and his sons, who are both worthless, it said in the book, they're done away with, and a new prophet's going to come around he's going to be right with God. He's going to represent God well. And that's Samuel, who's born of Hannah. Hannah's song, she prays for a son. And so this is what's said about this young priest. God says in 1 Samuel 2:35, in response to Hannah's beautiful prayer. You got to read. If you don't know anything about Hannah, you're missing out. So go home today and read about Hannah. Anyway, this is God's answer. I will raise up for myself a faithful priest, not like Eli and his worthless sons, who shall do according to what is in my heart and in my mind. And I will build him a sure house, that's descendants, and he shall go in and out before my anointed forever. Wait, Samuel died. Yeah. This is kind of a parallel idea to where God was talking to David saying, you're going to die, but one is going to come out of you who will end up being a king forever. Well, Samuel's going to die. It's a great parallel. Samuel's going to die, and there's bad people in place of the priesthood, and someone's going to take his place that comes from Samuel, but they are going to be, whoever this is, a priest forever. So could it be, the rabbis would argue, could it be that in some sense our Messiah is not only the great justice bringer, but that he's also, like Samuel, a priest forever? Now, that was a very minority view. When the rabbis would talk, they'd say, no, that can't be. There's a good reason why that can't be, and here's the good reason why that can't be. Because priests have to come out of the tribe of Levi, and rulers like that have to come out of Judah. So how can you have a Messiah, Prince, King, the Mashiach Nagid? How can you have one man come out of 2 tribes? Impossible. So then the rabbis would get all tied up arguing about how can the Messiah be also those 2 things when one person can't come from 2 tribes? Won't work. So the guys who were for the eternal priesthood of the Messiah would get shouted down, and the kingly Messiah would be all. So by the time Jesus comes along, all they would talk about is the kingly Messiah. That's all they were waiting for. Because the kingly Messiah, he would solve all of our short-term problems with the people who are occupying our land, Rome, right? So that was necessary. However, today the writer of Hebrews is going to go, not impossible to have both a Messiah who is from Levi. Well, no, at least he's going to be a priest. And the deal about how you solve this is the meat today. It's Melchizedek. What? Now, when you got a good steak on your plate, when you're at the steakhouse, well, when you're at, not that steakhouse, but steakhouse. You carve off a little piece at a time. You don't take a big chunk. You put it in your mouth. You chew it and go, oh. So you're going to have to eat this slowly, okay? Okay? Here we go. Melchizedek, the meat for the day. First, the author starts with a history review. The history review about Melchizedek, so you can kind of get your feet on the ground. Let's get our feet on the ground, the history review, which we actually have covered the last 2 weeks, but we'll do it again just so you know. Okay, this Melchizedek, the king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, right? And if you wonder if that title is the same Most High God as when we talk about the Most High God in the rest of the Bible, it is. And a really great place to check that out, Psalm 91. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. And he ties it together very clearly. Yeah, we're talking about a guy who pops out in a cameo appearance in the movie of the Old Testament of Abraham, pops out of nowhere. He doesn't come from any of the tribes of Israel because the tribes of Israel don't exist yet. They're going to be the offspring of Abraham's grandson, so they don't exist. So he's like who knows where he comes from. But he is actually a priest of the God of all gods, of the Most High God. How did he get there? I mean, Abraham traveled all the way from Mesopotamia to come into this crazy land and talk about what God was going to give to his offspring. So how can you find a priest who's actually orthodox to the Most High God? That's just a crazy deal. But he is. And he pops out. Priest of the Most High God. He met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. And to him, Abraham apportioned a 10th part of everything. So you remember the story. We'll do a brief review. We'll go back and check his history, Genesis 14. After Abraham's return, remember Abraham's nephew Lot and his family and all his stuff get taken in the midst of a big war, 4 against 5 kings, and they get taken captive and taken way off in the north. And Abraham is led to take some of his guys, about 300 guys, and go up and get them back. And he gets them back against all odds, because we're going up to take back what 5 kings have taken to the north. Abraham goes up with 300 guys and amazingly comes back with Lot and his family and all his stuff and a bunch of booty from the kings. It's incredible. So that's what happens. And on his return, verse 18 of Genesis 14, Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. What? And a little more history, verse 19. And he blessed him, Melchizedek blessed Abram, and said, blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him a 10th of everything. Now, this is before the commandment for the tithe has ever been spoken in the Old Testament. But it was also a very common payment. If you were a sharecropper on someone else's land that they owned, you would work the land. You get to keep 90% of what you worked the land for, and you gave 10% back to the landowner. So it was a way of saying, I know this isn't all mine. I have you to thank for a lot of what just happened. So what Abram's doing right here is he's using a very common way of saying, you're right, God has blessed me. The reason I got back here with Lot and his family is not because of me, it's because of God. And so he pays a portion back to God as a thank you. Okay, so that's a very common kind of thing. Also, when you see Melchizedek say, blessed be Abram by God Most High, blessed just means you've received good. So what he's saying, it's almost a reminder to him. He says, you do recognize, even though you've come back here with Lot and a family, and you've been so successful, you do realize that this is because of what God has done for you. You've been blessed by God. Okay? And also in retrieving them, God's been blessed by what Abram's obedience was in all of this. And Abram gave him a 10th of everything. Okay. And that's pretty much all of Melchizedek. So what? I mean, that's supposed to change everything? That's supposed to change the tension we have about the Messiah being a priest as well as a king? I mean, that relieves the tension? Meat. You ready? Cut off another slice. Here we go. He is, first, by translation of his name, King of Righteousness. Well, wait, where did you say that? That wasn't in the text. No, he told us by his name, Melchizedek. And here's Melchizedek in Hebrew. It's Melchizedek. Melchizedek. means king. Zedek means righteousness. So by his name, you remember in the ancient times, you always name someone based on a characteristic of the person. So Melchizedek, and if you want to say it Hebrew style, there's the pronunciation guide. It's Melchizedek, not Melchizedek. Just saying, okay? So we know he says to start off with, look, this guy Melchizedek, he's very unusual. Start with his name, King of Righteousness. Not just a righteous dude, but a king of righteousness. A big dude. And does that title remind you of anybody? Hold that thought. Hold that thought. Because then he goes on and he says, and then he's also simultaneously King of Salem. That is the King of Peace. Well, Salem in Hebrew, Shalem. When you go to Israel and they bless peace on you, they say Shalom. It's peace. It's the word peace. Jerusalem today is Jerusalem or Yerushalayim. Shalom, peace. So he's the King of Peace. Does that ring any bells for you? If it doesn't ring any bells, you can check out this passage in Isaiah 9. Interesting. So here we have, now this is what's really jarring about this entire episode. We have almost nothing in the narrative about Melchizedek, except he's a big dude. he's someone who has these exemplary titles, not just righteous and peaceful. He's the King of righteousness and the King of peace. We don't know anything about his past. Boom, Abraham comes back from the north with Lot and his families. Boom, he shows up out of nowhere and blesses him. And he's got these exemplary titles. His name badge is too small to fit the bigness of his titles. And yet we know nothing about him. So anyone who's reading the narrative in the Old Testament knows that when you go back to the founder, the father of the Jews, you would think Abraham. And we know a lot about Abraham. We know where he used to live. We know how he came to be in the promised land. We know when he died. We know a lot about Abraham. We know who he married. We know a lot about Abraham. But this guy shows up in the scene with almost no data at all, and yet with the biggest titles in the entire Old Testament. Bar none in terms of titles for men. I mean, it's just huge. And you should be gobsmacked at this point. And then he goes on, as we chew our slice on the meat, he is without father or mother or genealogy. Now, okay, wait. Does that mean he didn't have a father and a mother and no genealogy? Well, literally, because he's a literal man, no. But what he's saying is, sort of figuratively, we don't know anything about his past. I mean, he could have been some alien being who arrived on a spaceship and just showed up and blessed Abraham and went away, because we know nothing about where he came from. We know nothing about where he went. So this sort of, I'll say folklore about Melchizedek built up in the Jewish community. He's a mysterious guy. The biggest titles in the Old Testament, but we know nothing about him. And he has a relationship with Abraham that tends to make us think he's more important than Abraham himself. But we know nothing about him. So in a sense, figuratively speaking, you could say that because of that absence of information, it's like he never had a father. It's like he doesn't even have a genealogy. He just shows up, poof, out of nowhere. Interesting. Because he neither has beginning of days nor end of life. He's such a mysterious figure in so many ways, and yet has some of the most eye-catching titles anywhere. I mean, it's just like you should scratch your head and go, man, I don't know what to make of Melchizedek. But there's something really deliberate God's doing in the narrative with Abraham with this guy. But actually, the writer says he resembles the Son of God. He continues a priest forever. So just like Jesus is eternal, in a sense, Melchizedek is, if you will, a type of Jesus, if not Jesus himself. And you can debate that yourselves and talk about that over lunch, but a lot of people like to think it was Jesus himself. But in a real sense, Melchizedek does really represent a type of Jesus, someone who has an eternal nature about him, like in a way no past and no future specifically, because he encompasses all of that. And yet he's the King of righteousness and the King of peace. He's clearly a type for Jesus himself. If not, perhaps Jesus himself. He's just a fascinating guy. But the writer of Hebrews is trying to make a connection between Jesus as our high priest, he's going to talk about Jesus as our priest, and Melchizedek as a priest, who clearly Melchizedek is not a priest from the sons of Aaron because Aaron hasn't been born yet. But he's still a priest of the Most High God. A different kind of priest from the entire Old Testament. A really different guy. Okay, he continues on this meaty talk. So, see how great this man was to whom Abraham, the patriarch, gave a tenth of his spoils? So Abraham, in his thankfulness, gives a tenth of his spoils to a priest in thankfulness to God. Because that's what happened, remember, many, many years later. You'll see this in the temple when Abram's grandson has all the 12 boys and one of them Levi and starts, all the priests. And then many years after that, you got the temple going. So you got all this stuff going on. But here, Abraham, the guy who's actually the patriarch of the entire Israel experience, he is paying a tithe to Melchizedek in thanks to God. See how great this man must be, Melchizedek? And then he goes on. And look, those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office, they have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, which happened with the temple many years later after this. That is, from their brothers, though they're also descended from Abraham. So yeah, that's what the Levites did. They took the tenth that came from the people, and that was offered as a thankfulness to God. But this man who does not have his descent from them, that is from Aaron and from Levi, this man received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises of God. And we'll talk about the theme of the promises, God's promise for rest, actually. So he's saying, does this not mess your head up a little bit that Abraham himself is paying tithes to this guy? Thankfulness to God. And then he goes on to keep the distinction going. And it is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. The inferior is blessed by the superior. Who did the blessing? Melchizedek. Who's the inferior? Abraham. Wait, isn't Abraham the father of our nation? Isn't he the one where everything started from? Isn't he the top dog in the entire story of the nation of Israel? Abraham. Nope, not the top dog. He's inferior to Melchizedek. Oh, what? What are you talking about? We don't know anything about Melchizedek. I know, but there you go. It's without dispute. You can't argue it. The inferior is blessed by the superior. I mean, we all know that. So what are you going to make of this guy, Melchizedek, who's the priest of the Most High God? And Abraham even understands that, and he's paying a tithe to him. What do you make of Melchizedek? And he's a priest. Well, what kind of priest? Well, I don't know. Clearly not from Aaron. Clearly not from Levi. See, he's a priest. I don't know what kind of priest he is. But he's big. Okay? Verse 8. And in the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, right? The Aaronic priests. However, in contrast, in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. And what he's basically saying is he's immortal. He's making a case for tithes went to mortal men who were priests, but now the tithe is going to a priest who continues to live. He is immortal in that sense. And that was kind of the folklore about Melchizedek. He didn't have a past or a future. He encompasses all of that, just like the Son of God does. But immortal. So he's making the contrast case. Verse 9. In fact, this blew my mind first time I read it. So one might actually say, okay, that Levi himself and all those priests who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham. Hold on to your seats. Because he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. So you see what he's saying? You got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob has Levi, then you have all the priests after that. So in a sense, the priests in the Levites, the sons of Aaron, in a way, they're paying tithes to this priest 4 generations earlier because they're genetically inside Abraham. So it's an interesting case. So you could actually say the guys that we so classically identify, the priests, from the Levites who accept the tithes from the people of Israel, they were actually paying tithes through their great-grandfather Abraham when he was standing there next to Melchizedek. So how about that? The priests who received tithes were paying tithes. By the way, you look in the Old Testament, you don't see priests paying tithes. They received the tithes of the people, but now they're actually paying their tithes. So he's making a wonderful case for the superiority of this priest of the Most High God over all the Aaronic Levitical priesthood. There's something about this guy that's even bigger than all of those priests. And he goes on, and he really drills this down. Look, if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under the people received the law, if perfection, that is the eradication of sin, had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek rather than the one named after the order of Aaron? So he's saying there was, in a certain way, with the Levitical priests, we were spinning our wheels when it came to sin because they never reached the perfection of the eradication of sin. And if they could have, there wouldn't have been a reason to have another priest who in some capacity can do something different about sin. That's what he's saying. He's going to expand this as well. For look, when there's a change in the priesthood, from Levitical to, let's say, Melchizedek, we'll call that, there's necessarily a change in the law as well. And why is that? Well, the original priests had a law about what God asked the nation of Israel to do in terms of response to him, offerings and sacrifices for sin, sacrifices for thank offerings, all that kind of stuff. And the Levitical priests knew what their jobs were. And the Aaronic priests knew what their jobs were when they moved the tabernacle in the wilderness. I mean, they all knew what their jobs were. But what he's saying is, what do you say we come up with a brand new kind of priest? A brand new kind of priest. Forget everything you know about Levitical priests. Let's come up with a brand new kind of priest. If there's a brand new kind of priest, then probably the law, that is what pertains to how you deal with this priest, is going to be totally different. You have to have a different set of rules for this guy because he's not from Aaron. He's from I don't know where. So when you see a new priest come on the scene, as you're reading here, you got to ask yourself, what's his job? That's what he's saying. What's his job? This provokes some deep thoughts. 13. For the one whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe. Which tribe? There are no 12 tribes of Israel at this point. They're still 4 generations away. But he's from somewhere else. He's from another tribe from which no one has ever served at the altar. So he's saying this guy comes from who knows where genealogically, but he doesn't have any connection with the guys who serve at the altar, the Levitical Aaronic priests. He's a different dude altogether. He's a different bird. Has a different job in some sense. For it's evident that our Lord, he makes a connection back to Jesus, was descended from Judah. There's no dispute about that. And in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. So he's just reminding us about our problem we started with. If Jesus came from Judah, Moses didn't say anything about anyone from Judah being a priest. That's just not, it's not there. I'm agreeing with you on this. But this is not that kind of priest, a Levitical priest. This is something different, guys. This becomes even more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek. What's the likeness? He seems to be eternal in some sense, mysterious, has a different job, and yet is clearly superior to Abraham. See his case? Another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become a priest, not on the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodily descent. That is, he's not a priest because he's from Levi. That doesn't work anymore. Because he's a different kind of priest. Different kind of priest. But by the power of an indestructible life. What? Well, you remember the idea is now Melchizedek seems eternal. We know nothing about his pastor's future. He seems eternal in that sense. And if that indeed is the case, then what qualifies you to be a priest like Melchizedek is that you seem eternal. Or that you have an indestructible life, that you go on living forever. You're a forever kind of priest. If indeed you can claim that about someone, and we're talking about Jesus now, then you can say that he is a priest not because of descendants from Levi or Aaron. He's a priest because he's eternal. Or in Jesus' case, an indestructible life. See, you could make this case if they'd crucified Jesus and he stayed dead. But since he came alive, you can say, well, he lives still right now. He's alive. He's eternal in that sense. So Jesus is a high priest. He's a priest in our life of a wholly different kind than the Aaronic priesthood. Forget that for a while. He's a priest, and a priest, remember, is someone who intercedes between you and God. He does something to intercede, gets between you and God and facilitates in some kind of way. And here's one who qualifies on the basis of the fact that he has an indestructible life. He's eternal. Which is why, in the back of my mind, I chuckle a little bit when people claim to be Melchizedek priests. Because here's the qualification. It's just there. Something very special about Melchizedek in terms of him being a mysterious, eternal-like being, very much like who Jesus is. And so he's making his case right here. If you've never thought of the Messiah, and hence the Son of God, as being a priest because he's not a Levite, you can erase that right now because he's a different kind of priest. Now he's going to take this idea and he's going to run with this for the next 5 or 6 chapters. So if you're choking on your food right now, we can give you a spiritual Heimlich and knock that piece out of your chest. We're going to be able to kind of chew that a little bit more as we go on. But he's just introducing the idea. And for a Jew, they're probably standing up, waving their arms, saying, no, you can't have another priest. There's only priests that come out of Aaron and Levites. You can't have another priest. Well, what about Melchizedek? Well, we don't know about Melchizedek, but you can't have another priest. Well, we do. And he's Jesus. Break my head. Okay, he goes on. It's witnessed of him, talking about Jesus. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Now, he's going to quote this line about 1 billion times before the end of the book. Okay, maybe 1 million. Well, okay, maybe 1,000. Well, a lot. He's going to do this a lot. So it behooves you, like we did last week, to become familiar with where it comes from. Psalm 110. Psalm 110, which has the first 3 verses, very militaristic, hyper-justice-oriented, powerful Messiah. Last 3 verses, hyper-powerful, justice-oriented Messiah. And in the middle, you're a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. You got it? Yeah. Okay. So here's my question. If there's a priest not from Aaron that is not a Levite, well, does he sacrifice animals too, like Aaron does? I mean, if we're talking a different priest, you've already introduced the idea that when you have a different kind of priest, he must have a different kind of job. So what's his job if it's not sacrificing animals? Does he have another job? On the one hand, he says, a former commandment, that's the sacrificing at the altar, a former commandment is set aside because of its weakness and uselessness. Okay, this is where all the Jews jump up out of their chairs and start screaming and waving their fists and stuff like that. What do you mean the old covenant with the temple and the tabernacle and the sacrifices? What do you mean it's weak and useless? And while he hears you standing up on your chair and waving your fist, he answers it right here. Boom, he says, the law made nothing perfect. That's how it's weak. That's how it's useless. Well, then what was the law for? To point out the fact that you can't do it. To reveal sin, but not to solve the problem of sin, but to reveal sin. So the law made nothing perfect. The law could only reveal sin. It couldn't actually do anything therapeutically to rid you of sin. Now, you can try and do it, and you can value doing good in that sense. You can take the 10 Commandments, which are the hub of the law, and you can say, well, those are all good things. I can do those things, I think. But you'll find yourself failing all the time. What he's saying is that the law never made anyone perfect. That's why, even though it's valuable in a sense to reveal sin, that's why, in terms of solving the problem, it's weak and useless. And so get this written in your head. The Mosaic law, which is powerful and useful to reveal sin, is powerless to solve sin. That's how it's weak and useless. That's why when people talk about, I live to fulfill the Mosaic law, I go, you don't understand. You can't make yourself perfect by obeying the Mosaic law. The law itself is weak and useless to do that. And Jesus even told his apostles, your spirit is willing, but your flesh is weak, man. You can't do it. You can't do it. But it does have a powerful and purposeful role on God's part to reveal the problem, to bring you to a point of crying out to God and say, God, I have failed in everything I do, and I can't seem to eradicate sin even though I want it gone. What is the solution to eradicating sin in my life? I'm well aware that I'm sinful. You gave me your law. What's the answer? Dun, 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 Jesus. Okay, that's where he's going with this. But on the other hand, talking about this new one, there's a better hope. A better hope is introduced through which we draw near to God. And remember, you cannot draw near to God if you have a speck of sin. And life and rest is found drawing near to God. Real life comes in the presence of God. But in this cutaway of the Solomon's temple, God's in the far right chamber there, and you can't go in there. It's forbidden, because if you go in there with even a speck of sin, you're toast, almost literally. Right? You can't do that. So how do we draw near to God? Well, in the end of chapter 4, he told us, because of what's been going on, who Christ is, we can draw near with confidence to the throne of grace. Why? So we can receive mercy and grace to help in time of need. So we have confidence to come into the presence of God. And what he's telling us right here is this new priest, his job is not to sacrifice goats and sheep out on some altar. His job is to pave the way for us to come in the very presence of God where you can find life. What? And I'll point out as well, when my little arrow went across there, I'll do it again. Here comes the arrow. Oh, forget the arrow. But you come in from the left side of this picture, which is the entry. It's the eastern side of the temple or the tabernacle. You come in on that left side, and you have to go past the sacrifices that are happening in the courtyard on the left. You go through those. You go through the opening into the holy place, which is in the center. You go through the doorway into that. And then you get into God's presence. You go through the veil until you get to the far right in that picture. You go in the presence of God. You go through a lot of things in order to come to the presence of God. And so he uses the word through quite deliberately here. We have this other priest through which we draw near to God. And at one point, Jesus himself will call himself the veil. Ooh, Jesus is that veil that we go through. Okay, we don't have time to talk about that. We'll get to that. Okay. And then to kind of pin down his point about the superiority of Melchizedek, who is a type of Jesus, and so Jesus himself, to get that superiority pinned down, verse 20, it was not without an oath. It was an oath from God. For those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath, okay? But this one was made a priest with an oath by the one who said to him, here it is again, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind, you're a priest forever. Now, this is applying to the type of Melchizedek, and it's applying to Jesus specifically. You're a priest forever, indestructible life as a priest. So this makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. Okay, and there's another uproar in the room. Because what you're saying to a Jew sitting there is you're saying, wait, are you telling me that the covenant that we know about, the covenant that was given to Abraham, which God will make, the next chapter from what we read about Abraham earlier, that covenant is a lesser covenant? There's a better covenant than that? And you mean the covenant that was given to David and his offspring? That covenant? I mean, wait, all those covenants are lesser? There's a better covenant and we're clueless about it? I don't think so, a Jew would say. This is fighting words. This is really clearly fighting words. But he's made his point quite logically. What he's saying is, you guys know about the Levitical priests. And you know what they do. And they come from the tribe of Levi and the sons of Aaron. You know what they do. There's another kind of priest who's not constrained by that same calling of who they are. But he's nonetheless someone who intercedes between us and God in order to bring us near to God. That's his job. And since there's a different kind of priest, there's a different kind of job and a different kind of rule and a different kind of result. And so we have a different covenant. And it's a better one. Look, the former priests, they were many in number because, they were prevented by death from continuing in office. You had to have lots of priests because they'd die. There was no priest who went on forever, like we're talking about Melchizedek. They die. You had lots of them. However, but he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. That's the idea of the Melchizedek priest, is a priest who lives forever. Eternity past, eternity future, but who lives to intercede on our behalf to allow us to draw near to God. That's his job, okay? He continues forever. He's doing great contrast. And consequently, he's able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him. I like using the arrow. I'm just kind of stuck on that. It's whatever. But I mean, in a real sense, although that's a cutaway of Solomon's temple, it's a picture of the arrangement of the universe in a way where God is in his place and we are here, and there's a way in which we draw near to God. And I won't say it's physical in a sense, but it is spiritual. And so many times you look at this picture of the temple and you're talking about where common man lives on the far left, deep with sin, and where God is untouched by sin on the far right. And so how can something on the far left ever make it into something on the far right in this picture? In a spiritual sense, is what he's talking about. So if you want to draw near to God in reality, it's not in the temple, but the temple represents kind of this separation that goes on because of that. Okay, he always lives to make intercession. So that's his job. That's what he does. And he lives forever to do that. We don't have to have another priest. He's permanently that. That's just who he is. Then he goes on. For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest. Now look, when we talk about, remember we talked about the superiority of Melchizedek over Abraham, and hence because the priest's in his loin, the superiority of Melchizedek over the Aaronic priesthood. Check out what kind of priest we have now. Such a priest who's holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, exalted above the heavens. Now that's a high priest. This is someone who has connections in high places with God himself. And in fact, in the case of Jesus, God himself. This is the kind of priest we're talking about, not the Aaronic priest. And I mentioned earlier when we came into this talking about Hannah, who is the mother of Samuel. And then previous to that, the priesthood in Israel was really kind of tanking at the time of 1 Samuel. And you had Eli and his sons, his worthless sons is what it says. It doesn't have the spit stuff, but it says worthless. I mean, the priesthood was full of really questionable guys. And when you get to the time of Jesus, you look at the priesthood at the time of Jesus where they had their kangaroo courts where they're trying Jesus. Priesthood is full of sinful men. And many times at the time of Jesus, those sinful men were elevated to very high elite positions. They didn't know anything about the struggles that people had on the street. And yet they were charged to do something to be intermediaries and accessories between the people and God himself. And yet by the time of Jesus, it had been completely twisted upside down. It wasn't that. It was a power trip. But look at the high priest that we have now. Holy, which means he is separated from the contamination of sin, this place. Innocent, he's not guilty of anything. Unstained by sin itself, it hasn't touched him. Separated from sinners. However, the writer here also mentions much earlier, several chapters back, that we have a high priest who can sympathize with us because he's been like us. He's walked in our shoes. But this means that he's separated from the sinful influence of sinners. That doesn't say he's separated from man, separated from sinners. And exalted above the heavens. And exalted means that he's lifted up high. So remember I said there's kind of a symbolic thing with the temple where you have God in that far right chamber separated from man. Well, he's talking about that as well now. He's saying he's exalted up above the realm of sinful man. He's outside of that, and yet we can relate to him. Okay, that's the kind of high priest we want. He has no need, as a result, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins, and then for those of the people. Because if you remember, the high priest, before they did really important stuff, they had to make sure that they themselves personally were clean, so they would offer sacrifice for themselves, and then they were fit to offer sacrifice for others. Okay? So he says, look, this priest has no need of that. And you know why? Since he did this once for all when he offered up himself. He did one sacrifice. It is finished for all time. Once for all. The just for the unjust. Once for all. A great high priest who made the sacrifice, and the sacrifice wasn't the blood of goats or bulls or pigeons. It was himself. Once for all, the just for the unjust. It says this is a kind of priest that's unknown to the Old Testament. This is the new priest. Look, the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests. Yeah. But the word of the oath, that oath again, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You're a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. By the way, even that phrase in verse 4 of Psalm 110 speaks of something of extraordinary purpose on God's part. Extraordinary, unchangeable purpose. It's not like God's going to change his mind next week. And that's why the author here keeps emphasizing the oath. You make an oath and it doesn't change. This is one of the strongest statements of the purposefulness of God's plan for us, for humanity. He has sworn and he will not change his mind. That's it. It is done. You're a priest according like Melchizedek, eternal in presence and interceding for us as the Prince of Peace, the King of Peace, and the King of Righteousness. Now, that's a priest. Okay. But by the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son, who's been made perfect forever. Such a strong case for the fact that the Messiah is also a priest. And that Messiah priest is Jesus. Okay. Whew. Oh man, we're done. We probably didn't answer any of your questions because he's going to take the next 5 or 6 chapters to answer everything he introduced here. He literally just set the table and made observations about everything that he put on the table for you to eat. And then you're standing there, if you're a Jew, standing on your chair waving your fist. If you're a Gentile like this, you're going, what? And I mean, it's really disorienting. But let me just make a list of the things that he outed right here that he didn't fully answer yet, which should have tweaked your curiosity, which we will come back to later on. Like, for instance, I went backward in the text. What is better about the better covenant? Why is that better? He didn't explain it, you notice. He also said, how does Jesus guarantee it? How is he the guarantor of a better covenant? In what way did he guarantee it? He guaranteed it himself. What? In what way? He didn't explain that either. He also said that we're not just saved, we're saved to the uttermost. Well, what in the world does that mean? I'm either saved or I'm not saved, right? Saved to the uttermost sounds like it's more complete in some way. Yeah, okay, we're getting there. He'll explain all these things. These are questions you should have been writing in the side reference of your Bible, saying, well, what does that mean? Well, what does that mean? Better? Uttermost? I don't know what that means. What are you talking about? Here's another one. A better hope to draw near to God. I have a hope of drawing in God's presence, but now I have a better hope of drawing near to God. How do I have a better hope of drawing near to God? During the time of Israel, and they had their Levitical priests, the people in the nation of Israel didn't have any hope of drawing near to the presence of God. The only people who could do that were priests, and then the high priest once a year. But now we have a better hope. We actually have an expectation, a serious expectation, that we can draw into the presence of God. And now we have a better hope because of this new kind of a priest. Yeah. I'd like to talk more about how useless and weak this former commandment was. I'll tell you, it sounds bad. It sounds disrespectful of God to look at that first covenant and go, useless and weak, man. Whose idea was this? Oh, sorry, God. You're dead. No, it's like, it's powerful words. And we already explained it a little bit. He'll explain it a whole ton more about how that covenant, although powerful and necessary, didn't get you to the end where you need to be. Weak and useless. We need to talk more about that. He will talk more about that. And this indestructible life to be a Melchizedek priest. An indestructible life. Well, we explained that a little bit because of the idea that Melchizedek was like an eternal priest in that sense. But an indestructible life, why didn't he say, and this is my question every time I read this, why didn't he say an eternal priest, an eternal being? He said an indestructible life. And actually you can answer that question a little bit because we already know that the priest has to be in some way as an intermediary between fleshly man and spiritual God. He has to somehow have a leg in both camps of mankind and God himself. And so he has a foot in each one of those worlds, which means he is both of those at the same time. He is God as well as being man at the same time. So if that's the case, and he is eternal, then even though he's fleshly like us, he has to be immortal. And since we know the brutality that came on Jesus, he's got to be indestructible. And that's where he's getting at. He's going to explain that a little bit more. He's got to be eternal, but man. And that's a great question. And so with a new high priest, Jesus, there's a change in the law. So this is the thing that even to this very day, Jews, get kind of resistant about. You can't change the law. And throughout the entirety of the nation of Israel's history, the rabbis have convened and talked and wrestled over what the law means. I mean, the law is supreme, and there's nothing wrong with that. And Jesus himself gave great honor to the law. He says, I didn't come to blow up the law. I didn't come to erase anything in the law. I came to fulfill it. So I'm not going to come here and tell you, you don't need to do that kind of stuff, because I'm not here to turn off the law, because not one jot or tittle is going to change, and I'm not going to change it. Okay, so there's respectability in the law, but there's a change in the breeze when you have a different priest too. There's something that's not in conflict with it, but it's somehow compatible with it and complementary to it. And this is what he's trying to introduce the idea of. This priest is bringing a new dimension to the law that you may have never thought about before. There's a change in the law because there's a new sheriff in town. There's a new priest in town. So the rules are changing in some kind of a way. So you could say during the first century, as a Jew and a Gentile, you could ask yourself at the time, I'm confused about the Jewish law and, let's say, the Jewish law and Gentiles. And this came up in Acts. You would see this in Acts. And it was referenced in Paul's letters. If you've got Gentiles and Jews, and you've got this law, this Mosaic law, and this stuff that went on right there, do the Gentiles have to do that too? Or do they have to become Jews first, and then they have to do that stuff too? So this debate was going on in the first century. Great debate. It was a great debate. But the only reason the debate came up is because Jesus, as a new priest, raised a new question about whether things are changing. See, if Jesus had come on the scene and said, I'm a Jew, I'm a high priest Jew, I'm a different kind of a Jew, but if you want to follow me, you got to become a Jew, and you got to do Jewish things. He didn't say that. He also said he didn't blow up the law. So there was a great confusion in the first century, even to this very day. So how does this work? The old law is durable and necessary and purposeful, but Jesus is representing a change in the wind. So what does that look like? And what specifically is that like? Now you see evidence of this all through the Gospels as well. Remember when Mark is talking about food issues, it's a great scene because Mark puts this little parenthetical statement in one section of one of the narratives saying, so this means that all foods are clean, man. And again, a Jew would hear that and go, Jesus doesn't have the power to change the cleanliness of food, does he? You see, this is the tension that comes up. So I don't want you to poo-poo the old law and say, it's nutty, because Jesus himself supported the validity and the worth of it. But there's something about the construction that God did in the old law and what the priest did that made it useless and worthless in terms of changing the presence of sin in our lives. It only revealed sin in our lives. And yet at the coming of the new priest, who again is also in the job of an intermediary between us and God, now comes the solution to the knowledge of sin and the eradication of sin. Step one, step two. One priest, two priests. Okay? So something has definitely changed. So did any of these questions come to your mind while we were reading? Because I didn't really explain them, and you can't in the short time we have. Well, it turns out there are going to be many chapters coming up. So again, I come back to this idea of setting a table. He has set a table for us today. We pulled up our chairs at the table. We looked and said, that looks really tasty. We all got a portion, and we're eating it a small chunk at a time so we can appreciate it. He realizes it's going to take you a while to eat this meal. Okay? It's going to take you chapters to eat this meal. But he's going to take every one of these items I just highlighted, and he's going to expand them. Go, this is going to blow your mind. It's just like when you go to a new fancy restaurant and they put stuff in front of you you've never seen before, and you're scared to try it. And then they say, just try it. And you pull it up and you taste it and go, hey, I'm glad I came here today and sat down at this table because I'm tasting things I've never tasted before. Well, that's what's in store for you as we finish this meal in the next 6 or so chapters about all this stuff. But remember, and we'll just close with this, the role of the priest, from the Levitical priest to Jesus our high priest, the role of the priest is to get us together with God. That's their role, so that we can draw near to God with confidence. And the old law and the old priest couldn't get us quite there. They could reveal the fact that we can't get there. And yet the new priest can get us in there. And so as you remember the picture of the temple, you remember coming into God's presence on that far right of the picture, and how you come through so many things that have to deal with your own sin to get there, and how they keep you out of the nearness of God. There's priests, and then there's the priest. And eventually we can draw near to God. We're going to sing this song again that we sang earlier that alludes to this, because when this says take me in, he's saying take me in to that inner place where God himself is. And interestingly enough, there's an allusion in the song, I don't know if you caught it, that alludes back to Isaiah 6. Isaiah, when he was being made basically a spokesman for God, he found himself in the throne room of God. He found himself in the presence of God, and he threw himself on the ground. This is chapter 6 of Isaiah. You can read it. And as he threw himself on the ground, he realized, oh man, I'm toast. I'm in the presence of God. And he says, woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips. Like, just the things I've said. How can I be a spokesman for God because my lips say horrible things? James himself says that. He says, how can your lips say one thing and bless, and how can they curse in another? And so Isaiah realizes, he throws himself down, and then God lifts him up, and his angels go into this fire and grab some hot coals and touch his mouth and his tongue and said, look, now you're cleansed. Let's get on with business. And so it's alluded to in this song. He says, there it is, take the coal, cleanse my lips. Hineni, here I am. So this is all about coming into the presence of God, and this is about serving him and passing by the crowds of people and the priests who are outside singing and a hunger and thirst. And there's the brazen altar up there that's outside the temple. This is all symbolically about coming out of the world of sin and coming into the presence of God. And he has paved that way through the one priest and the one sacrifice for you. Drawing near to God. Okay. Father, this is a lot of stuff. And I'd be lying if I said I understood it all completely. I sort of get a lot of it, but I'm not confident that in my lifetime I'm ever going to get my arms totally around it. But it does encourage my heart that here is a God who created me and who wants to bless me with his presence and has gone to the trouble, even before Abraham, to lay a foundation of the one priest who would solve the problem of our separation from God due to our own personal sin, who would pave the way into the very presence of God for us. And Lord, that privilege and that life that comes from the nearness of you is something that we had no hand in achieving. You did it all through your great high priest, Jesus, who continues to exist on our behalf, to intercede on our behalf in high heavenly places, holy places separated from sin. And you bring us into the nearness of God. And then unbelievably, you give us your Spirit inside of us. And now instead of going into the inner chamber of the temple, because you're in us, you call us your temple. Lord, I'm still getting my arms around this. But the bottom line for this simple mind is the fact that you want to give us life in your presence. And because of that, we are eternally grateful. And we do, in times of need, come confidently into that inner place where you are and beseech your grace and your mercy in our time of need. What a great God you are to us. What a loving God you are to us. What a persistent pursuer of us you are. You forget our sins. You draw us near to yourself. You give us life. Thank you for our great high priest, Jesus, who does that 100% himself for us. We are so loved. So thank you for this in Jesus' name. Amen.